For many years, people around the globe believed they fully understood Michael Jackson, but hidden inside his own body was a secret so deep, so surprising, that even his closest friends never guessed it. What experts found wasn't just a simple medical report. It was the buried truth of who Michael Jackson really was, written in the code of his own genes. Michael Jackson came into the world on August 29, 1958, in Gary, Indiana. He was the seventh of 9 kids born to Joseph and Catherine Jackson. From his earliest days, everyone was watching him. By age 5, he was already singing on stage alongside his brothers. By age 10, he had signed a record contract. By age 13, he already had a song at number 1. The world never gave Michael Jackson a chance to simply be a kid, and it surely never let him stay a mystery. Every part of his life was meant to be known, studied, and used up by fans who treated his existence like a storybook made purely for their amusement. Every show, every album, every public moment was picked apart with a focus that most people will never face and could never truly grasp unless they lived it themselves. But there were things going on inside Michael Jackson that no fan in the crowd could notice. Things written not on tabloid pages, not inside song lyrics, but in the tiny language of biology. His genes were holding stories, stories about who he truly was, where his roots came from, and what his own body was doing to him every day of his life. Stories that the public either refused to accept or simply lacked the knowledge to grasp. And those stories turn out to be far more amazing than anything any tabloid ever made up. Let's begin with what science has truly revealed about Michael Jackson. To get there, we need to return to a moment that changed everything. Not a show, not an album, not a performance, but a single TV interview that left 62 million Americans staring at their screens in total silence. The year was 1993. Michael Jackson sat across from Oprah Winfrey in what turned into one of the most watched interviews ever shown on TV. People expected scandal. People expected drama. Instead, they got a quiet man sharing a truth so plain, so medical, so ordinary in its clinical nature that it somehow still shocked an entire generation. He had vitiligo. That was the real answer. That was the secret his shifting skin tone had been concealing, or rather, the secret the world had been hiding from itself, because it felt far more thrilling to blame him for rejecting his own race than to simply trust him when he explained that his skin was unwell. Vitiligo is an autoimmune disorder. That's the very first fact science wants you to grasp. And it's the fact that reshapes everything else about how we view Michael Jackson's story. An autoimmune disorder means the body's defense system, the very system built to guard you, to keep you living, to battle off threats, instead turns on its own owner. With vitiligo, the immune system attacks and wipes out melanocytes. Melanocytes are the cells that make melanin, the pigment responsible for skin color. Once these cells are destroyed, the skin loses its color in that spot. The outcome is patches of pale skin, uneven in shape, hard to predict, and impossible to fully manage. You can't bargain with vitiligo. You can't talk your immune system into stopping through sheer willpower, diet, or calm thinking. The illness moves on its own biological schedule, and the person carrying it simply has to keep up with it. For a man with dark skin, the difference is sharp and instantly noticeable. For a man performing under bright lights before millions, it was crushing. And for a man whose whole public image was already studied under a magnifying glass, it turned into a topic of conversation so harsh and so dishonest that it took decades, plus a coroner's report, to finally settle it. Dr. Arnold Klein, Michael Jackson's skin doctor, first spotted the fading patches on Jackson's skin around 1983, right when Thriller was sweeping across the world. By 1986, he had taken a tissue sample and officially confirmed the diagnosis. At that moment, 2 conditions were proven through that sample. Vitiligo was one. The other was discoid lupus erythematosus, a type of skin-related lupus that also damages pigment and texture and is itself another autoimmune disease. So Michael Jackson wasn't facing just one illness attacking his skin. He was facing two separate autoimmune diseases at the same time, both targeting the exact thing the public had already chosen to mock relentlessly. Two diseases confirmed through tissue testing back in 1986, while the world was still years away from even taking the matter seriously. Here's what science tells us about how vitiligo spreads. It doesn't move at a steady or predictable rate. Based on research shared by Harvard Health, vitiligo can advance in cycles, with quick loss of color followed by long stretches where things stay calm. For some, it touches small spots on the hands or face and never spreads further. For others, especially those with a severe and widespread version of the condition, the loss of color eventually covers nearly all of the body. Michael Jackson belonged to that second, more severe group. By the time his autopsy took place in 2009, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Report officially recorded what his doctors had been saying for years. Patchy loss of pigment across 5 separate parts of his body. That was on the official record. That was backed by science. That was the truth that had been there all along for anyone ready to study the paperwork instead of the headlines. But truth didn't move newspapers the way gossip did. So the diagnosis that should have ended all debate instead became, for many people, just another reason for doubt. Surely he was faking it. Surely this was just a cover story. Surely no man could change that much from within unless he chose to, unless he wanted it, unless some darker reason sat behind every pale patch of skin. What science truly tells us about that darker theory is this. There is no known medical method that can lighten a whole person's skin evenly and safely. There's no treatment that could have shifted Michael Jackson from dark to a uniformly lighter shade without causing serious and visible harm to his body. What did exist, and what Jackson actually used, was a prescription cream called monobenzone, sometimes sold under the name Benequin. This is a topical cream approved by the FDA specifically to remove the remaining color from skin in patients with widespread vitiligo. The reasoning behind it is medical and sensible. When someone has lost pigment across most of their body, the patchy mix of pale and dark skin becomes a medical issue on its own. It causes uneven sun sensitivity, raises the risk of certain skin problems, and in Jackson's very public situation, created a look that the media used against him constantly. Depigmenting treatment, when guided by a doctor, creates a more even skin tone by treating the spots that still have color. It isn't cosmetic in the way tabloids described it. It is a medical choice, made with a physician's guidance, for a patient dealing with a genuine autoimmune disease. Michael Jackson wasn't trying to become someone else. His own DNA was doing something to his body that he never chose, never wanted, and couldn't halt. Yet the world picked the more dramatic tale. The world chose the version that felt more satisfying, more scandalous, long before clicks were even something to count. Now here's where Michael Jackson's DNA story turns in a totally different and equally amazing direction. Because what the public fixated on was the surface of his skin. What genetic researchers quietly discovered was something far deeper, the real origin story of his family, traced back across generations, through slavery, through survival, through a lie the Jackson family had carried for over 100 years without even realizing it was false. The Jackson family had long believed, and often repeated, a piece of family history that felt like both a source of pride and an unsolved riddle. They believed their ancestor, a man called July Jack Gale, was the son of a Native American father. This was the spoken history passed down through generations. For many Black families, Native American ancestry was a story carrying layers of meaning, pride, identity, an explanation for certain features, a tie to the land. Joe Jackson, Michael's father, was known for his green eyes and the reddish tones in his appearance, which seemed to add some visual proof to the family story. The family kept this piece of history close, with the calm certainty of people who'd heard it so many times that it had simply turned into fact. But DNA doesn't care about spoken family history. DNA doesn't honor the tales families tell themselves to make peace with the past. DNA is a scientific record. When a genetic researcher named Sherman McCrae began working with a distant cousin of Michael Jackson's named Thomas Jackson III, what they found in the Y chromosome data told a totally different story than the one the Jackson family had trusted for generations. Thomas Jackson III shares a common ancestor with Michael Jackson. Both men descend from a man called Nero Jackson, making them distant cousins through the father's side. When Thomas sent his DNA for Y chromosome testing through family tree DNA, the results placed him in a haplogroup that had nothing to do with Native American roots. His Y DNA fell under a category called R-FT121435, a branch of the larger R1b haplogroup that is mostly linked to Western Europe and specifically to French ancestry. This wasn't a small or unclear result. This wasn't a fuzzy reading. The science pointed clearly and directly toward France. Researchers searched further and found a match. A male descendant of a French family named Richbourg appeared in the database, sharing the same endpoint genetic marker as Thomas Jackson III. And when genealogists started matching the paper trail to the DNA trail, the story that came out was one of the oldest and most painful stories in American history. July Jack Gale, the ancestor the Jackson family believed had Native American roots, was not the son of a Native American man. He was the son of his enslaver, a Frenchman named James Joel Richbourg. The DNA proved it. The historical records, traced back to Sumter, South Carolina, proved it. James Joel Richbourg died in 1804 and left July to his daughter Mary in his will, who had married a man named Josiah Gale. That's where the surname Gale came from. That is how July went from being the unrecognized son of an enslaver to being an enslaved person with a new last name on a new plantation, carrying none of the legal acknowledgement of his real parentage and all of the generational pain that came with that erasure. His whole identity, his name, even the supposed ancestry his descendants would repeat for generations, was shaped by the silence and cruelty of American slavery. The family tree DNA research, recorded through their genealogy blog and later discussed in genetic genealogy circles, places Michael Jackson's paternal line within haplogroup R-FT121435. The haplogroup data traces straight back to France. The shared ancestor connecting both the Jackson and Richbourg lines in that database predates the year 1750. The story the family told about Native American roots wasn't a lie told on purpose. It was almost certainly a tale that grew the way so many family stories grow when a truth feels too painful to say out loud. The shame tied to slavery and assault, the wish to give a fatherless ancestor a more dignified background, the quiet swapping of one ancestry for another. These things happened across thousands of Black families through generations, and Y chromosome testing is now gently and sometimes harshly setting the record straight. Michael Jackson never knew any of this. There's no proof that anyone in the Jackson family at the time had access to the kind of genetic testing that could have revealed it. This research came out years after his death, pieced together by a cousin he likely never met, working alongside genealogists whose whole purpose is using DNA to uncover truths that history buried. But it matters a great deal. It matters because it's part of the full picture of who Michael Jackson was on a biological level, the level the world talked about so often but rarely studied with any real scientific care. There's another layer to the DNA story around Michael Jackson, and this one is murkier, far less scientifically proven, and much more sensational, though it made headlines in 2014 and has largely faded since, which itself says something about how seriously it was taken even back then. A Beverly Hills dental surgeon named Joseph Goodman came forward saying he had gotten a DNA sample from a dental device once belonging to Jackson, bought at auction, which is itself worth pausing on, and claimed that a singer named Brandon Howard was a 99.9% DNA match to the king of pop, suggesting Howard was Jackson's biological son from an unknown relationship. The issues with this claim were many and obvious right away. The chain of custody for a dental device bought at auction isn't a controlled scientific setting. There's no peer-reviewed process behind this test. There was no independent confirmation from any qualified institution. Howard himself, after first joining the publicity around the test, later released a statement distancing himself from the whole matter. The Jackson estate denied the claims. No credible scientific group ever backed up the results afterward. The story lasted roughly 2 news cycles before disappearing, which is typically what happens when bold genetic claims surface without the institutional trust or repeatable method to support them. But the Brandon Howard episode shows something important about how DNA and Michael Jackson collide in the public mind. His biology was constantly being claimed by someone, by fans who thought they spotted his features in strangers, by people insisting his kids couldn't really be his, by tabloids that spent years claiming his shifting looks were a personal choice rather than an illness. These claims were almost never rooted in real science. They were almost always fueled by a wish for a more exciting story than the true one. Speaking of his children, this is maybe the most emotionally tangled part of the whole DNA discussion around Jackson. He had 3 kids. Prince Michael, born in 1997, is the eldest. Paris arrived in 1998. Blanket, whose legal name is Prince Michael II, was born in 2002. Their mother, or at least the legal and recognized mother of the 2 oldest, is Debbie Rowe, Jackson's second wife, who shared after his death that she was artificially inseminated and later gave up her parental rights in return for a financial settlement. Blanket was born through a surrogate. No official DNA test has ever been made public, confirming or denying Michael Jackson's biological tie to any of his 3 children. His children have stated they are biologically his. Debbie Rowe has openly discussed the details around the pregnancies. The children themselves have chosen not to take any DNA tests, and that decision deserves the same respect we'd give anyone facing a deeply personal question about identity and parentage in front of a world that has always felt entitled to know everything. Their DNA, whatever it might show, belongs to them. It isn't public property. It isn't a story owed to anyone outside that family. What stands out when you step back and view the whole picture science has actually shown is how consistently the real truth turns out more complicated and more human than the rumors ever were. The story of Michael Jackson's skin isn't a tale about a man ashamed of being black. It's a story about an autoimmune disease attacking his melanocytes, confirmed by his doctors, confirmed by his autopsy, and recorded in the scientific literature on vitiligo in a way that will outlast every tabloid headline ever written about him. The story of his ancestry isn't about what any family believed to be true. It's a story about Y chromosomes, tracing a French line through the horror of American slavery, through generations of silence about how that line truly began, and into the present day, where genetic research has quietly and permanently set the record straight. Science doesn't turn Michael Jackson into a saint. Science doesn't settle every controversy from his life or clear him of every accusation ever made. What science does give us is the biological truth of who he was, what was happening inside his body, where his ancestors truly came from, and what his DNA was saying in a language only researchers with the right tools could translate. And the most striking part of that biological truth is how much of it he actually tried to tell us himself. He told Oprah Winfrey about his vitiligo in 1993, and 62 million people heard it, and then mostly chose not to believe him. He spoke again and again, publicly, about the pain of living with a condition that was visible, impossible to control, and constantly twisted by a media world that had no financial reason to share the plain medical truth. His dermatologist confirmed it. His autopsy confirmed it. Science confirmed it at every single stage. In every way, science is able to confirm something. And still, for years, the story that stuck was the one painting him as a man so filled with self-hatred that he was chemically wiping himself away. That story wasn't just false. It was false in a way that caused real damage to his reputation, to his mental health, to his ability to move through the world as a person instead of a screen for everyone else's assumptions. World Vitiligo Day falls on June 25th every year. June 25th is also the date Michael Jackson passed away. This day was set up to honor the awareness his journey created, the visibility he brought to a condition most people had never even heard of before his 1993 interview, and the layered legacy of being the most famous person on Earth, living with something invisible to everyone except himself and the doctors who treated him. A skin condition he openly shared became, after his death, the very thing the scientific community used to honor him, not for his music, not for his dancing, but for the quiet, accidental courage of living openly with something invisible to everyone but himself and the doctors who treated him. His DNA told us who he truly was. It told us about an autoimmune disease and the cruelty of a body turning on itself. It told us about French ancestors and enslaved family members and the long American story of how biological truth gets buried under more comfortable fiction. It told us about melanocytes and haplogroups and the remarkable precision with which science can now trace a person's roots across centuries and continents. What the DNA couldn't do, what no lab result has ever managed to do, is make people want to believe something less entertaining than what they already assumed. That has always been the real issue. Not the science, not the proof, not the truth that sat there waiting to be read. The world had a story about Michael Jackson, and it preferred that story. The world had a script, and the script needed him to be something specific, troubled, self-made, someone who had rejected his own roots and tried to become something else entirely through sheer willpower and the darkest kind of vanity. That version was simpler. It needed no medical knowledge, no genetic understanding, no willingness to sit with the uncomfortable truth of a human being whose life was genuinely, provably stranger and harder than most people could ever picture. But his DNA said something else. His DNA said this man carried 2 autoimmune diseases attacking his skin from within, while the world attacked his name from outside. His DNA said this family came from France through slavery, through survival, through a century of not knowing the truth about where they truly began. His DNA said the biology was never the real mystery. The mystery was always the world's refusal to believe it once the truth had been shared clearly, professionally, medically, and repeatedly. Michael Jackson is gone. He has been gone since June 25th, 2009, and the questions about his life haven't stopped, because he was the kind of person whose life kept raising questions that outlived him. But among all those questions, the ones science can actually answer have been answered clearly, repeatedly, and with the kind of proof that doesn't require taking anyone's word for it. He had vitiligo. His own body proved it. His doctors proved it. His autopsy proved it. His paternal ancestors were French, traced through the Y chromosome of a cousin he likely never knew, leading back to an enslaved man who was the unacknowledged son of a French slaveholder in 19th century South Carolina. That is the biological record. That is the genetic truth. That is what was hidden in Michael Jackson's DNA all along. Not a scandal, not a conspiracy, not the dark secret the headlines promised. Just the truth, complicated, deeply human, fully documented, and finally, at long last, deserving of being believed.